Racist manager kicks out black man. The truth? He's the owner. Darrell Carter pulled into the sun-soaked lot of Prestige Motors in Scottsdale, Arizona, his modest SUV rumbling softly before falling silent. He sat for a moment, the wheel beneath his hands warm, the desert heat shimmering against the row of pristine luxury cars parked under the unforgiving sun. A soft smile touched the corner of his lips. Today wasn't about buying a car. It wasn't even about checking sales numbers or balancing books. Today was about seeing the truth of a place he now owned, with no filters, no stage lights, no fake smiles when the owner badge was on his chest. Today, he wore a simple gray hoodie, worn jeans, and a pair of clean but ordinary sneakers, clothes that made him look like just another man walking in off the street. Not the man who had quietly signed the final paperwork to own Prestige Motors just 2 weeks prior. The glass doors of the showroom glinted under the Arizona sun, hiding the cool air, the scent of leather and fresh wax, and the quiet, calculated way people look at you when they think they know your worth by your shoes. Darrell took a slow breath and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under his sneakers grounding him as he walked toward those glass doors, ready to see if the staff he now paid would see him as a person or as a problem. He was ready for whatever truth lay waiting on the other side. The glass door opened with a soft chime, and Darrell stepped into the cool hush of the showroom. The scent of waxed leather and polished chrome floated through the air, a stark contrast to the dry Arizona heat he'd left behind. For a moment, conversations continued, two sales associates laughing softly near a white Range Rover, a receptionist tapping her nails against a tablet. But as they saw him, the laughter dimmed, replaced by quick glances and the tightening of smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Darrell felt it immediately. That quiet, practiced scan. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers. A soft judgment that floated in the air before words could form. He had felt it many times before, but it still cut in its quiet way. And then she came. Susan. She wore a sharp, navy blazer and a tight smile that was polished to match her heels. Her clipboard was hugged to her chest like a shield, her eyes flicking to the shoes, to the hoodie, and back to his face, settling into that professional mask that hid impatience. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clipped and cool. "Can I help you with something today?" Darrell smiled softly, his posture relaxed, hands slipping into his pockets. "Just looking around," he replied, gesturing casually to the rows of gleaming cars. Her eyes narrowed, just a flicker, but enough to reveal the calculation happening behind them. The soft twitch at the corner of her lips as she looked him over again, deciding what he was worth in that moment. "These are high-value vehicles," she said slowly, as if she was explaining something to a child. "We usually require pre-qualification before showing certain models." Perhaps. Her words hung in the air as a delivery driver called her name from across the showroom, but she didn't take her eyes off Darrell, unwilling to let him wander too far, like he might stain the air just by being there. Darrell raised an eyebrow, the smile still on his lips. "You're assuming I'm not qualified?" That caught her off guard for a breath, a single, blinking moment before she found her footing again, tightening her smile until it was nothing but teeth. "I'm just trying to save you time," she said. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to something more appropriate." The words were polite, but the sting of her assumption was sharp enough to taste. Darrell stayed silent for a moment, letting the tension breathe in the glossy, quiet showroom, his reflection staring back at him from the polished surface of a nearby black coupe. He knew who he was, but today he wanted to see who they were. Susan's heels clicked sharply as she returned from the delivery driver, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed with the brittle politeness of someone who believed they were being patient. "I've compiled a few options," she said, holding out a printout like it was a lifeline, though not for Darrell, but for herself, to push him out the door without saying it. Darrell took the paper without breaking eye contact. The list was exactly what he expected. Used sedans, an older SUV, a modest hybrid, all priced far below the glossy machines filling the showroom. The implication was clear: you don't belong here, so let's not pretend you do. He folded the paper neatly, tucking it into the pocket of his hoodie. "Appreciate the effort," he said calmly. Susan's eyes flickered, confusion breaking her professional mask for a moment before she straightened her shoulders again. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping as though she were confiding in him. "Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Darrell tilted his head, studying her the way she had studied him. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" For a moment, Susan faltered, the breath catching in her throat before she swallowed and regained her composure. "I've been doing this a long time," she said, trying to sound confident, but her words trembled under the weight of the truth she didn't want to name. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." Darrell's lips twitched into a faint, almost amused smile. Out of their depth. The phrase echoed in the back of his mind like a challenge. "Interesting," he said softly, letting the words sit between them, heavy in the quiet. The showroom was alive with subtle tension now. Sales associates glanced over, sensing the weight of the conversation even if they couldn't hear it. The hum of overhead lights seemed louder, filling the silence that Susan could no longer control. Darrell leaned back, hands still tucked in his hoodie pockets, voice steady. "How about this?" he said. "Let me speak to the owner." The words hit Susan like a slap she didn't expect. Her eyebrows shot up, her lips parting before she could stop them. "The owner," she echoed. "That's right," Darrell replied, his tone warm but unshakable, like he was asking for a glass of water, not turning her world on its head. "I'd like to have a word with them." Susan's lips curled into a forced smile, the kind that cracks under pressure. "Well, that's not possible today," she said sharply. "The owner doesn't just drop by for casual visits. They're a busy person." Darrell nodded, the small, calm nod of a man who knew exactly what was coming. "I'm sure they are," he said, glancing around the showroom, his eyes taking in every detail of the business he quietly owned. Susan's jaw tightened, the clipboard held to her chest like a shield, her composure hanging by a single, fraying thread. Outside, the Arizona sun kept shining on the polished cars, unaware that inside, the real test was just beginning. The silence between them felt thick, humming above the polished floor as Darrell stood calmly, his eyes soft but unwavering. Susan's forced smile faded, replaced by a flicker of frustration she didn't bother to hide anymore. "Look, sir," she said, her voice tightening, "I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to attend to. If you're serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting with one of our sales consultants. Otherwise—" She paused, but only for a breath, before the words slipped out with a quiet finality. "Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." Around them, the air in the showroom shifted. One of the sales associates near the receptionist's desk glanced over, eyes darting between Darrell and Susan, sensing that this was no longer a casual conversation. Darrell's hands remained tucked in his pockets, his shoulders relaxed. He tilted his head slightly, studying Susan, who now clutched her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Otherwise, you'll have to ask me to leave," he repeated, his voice calm, each word clear. Susan swallowed hard, but she nodded, forcing a stern expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," she said. "We have a standard to maintain here." For a moment, Darrell said nothing. The seconds stretched, the quiet in the showroom heavy enough that even the soft jazz playing overhead seemed to fade into the background. Then, with a slow exhale, Darrell reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone, the black screen reflecting the fluorescent lights above them. "All right," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "I'll make the call myself." Susan's eyes narrowed in confusion, her brow furrowing as she leaned forward just slightly. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice clipped. Darrell lifted the phone to his ear, giving her a small, polite smile as he turned away just enough to take the call. "Just calling the owner," he replied, as if he were letting her in on a small, harmless secret. "Shouldn't take long." Around them, conversation stopped. The sales associates near the desk froze, their eyes darting towards Susan, who stood there, mouth slightly open, caught between disbelief and dawning fear. Darrell's voice was calm as he spoke into the phone. "Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here?" He ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket, turning back to Susan with a small, almost apologetic shrug. "They'll be here shortly," he said, his voice warm, as if he were comforting her. Susan's lips moved, but no sound came out, her clipboard slipping a fraction as her arms dropped to her sides. Who did you just call?" she asked, her voice suddenly smaller than it had been moments before. Darrell glanced around the showroom, eyes flicking over the polished hoods and glass doors, then back to her. "Yes, we'll find out," he said softly. And in that moment, the entire showroom, its marble floors, its glittering cars, its polished glass, became the quietest place in Scottsdale, as everyone waited to see the truth that was about to walk through the door. Minutes stretched like hours. The showroom, once alive with the low hum of casual conversation, had gone almost silent, save for the gentle whir of the ceiling fans and the faint jazz crackling through the speakers. Sales associates pretended to shuffle paperwork while sneaking glances at Susan, whose face was locked in a tight, nervous smile. Darrell stood near a sleek black coupe, his reflection calm in its polished surface, hands still in his pockets, as if he had all the time in the world. Then the glass doors opened. A sharply dressed man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, his brown leather shoes clicking softly on the tile. He moved with purpose, scanning the room before his eyes landed on Darrell. His face broke into a warm, respectful smile. "Mr. Carter," the man exclaimed, extending his hand as he approached. "It's so good to see you." Darrell turned, matching the handshake firmly, the corner of his mouth lifting into a soft smile. "Thanks for coming, Alex," he replied, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Appreciate it." The room stiffened collectively, the air pulled tight like a string about to snap. Susan's clipboard nearly slipped from her hands as she stared, eyes wide, darting between Darrell and Alex, the realization creeping across her face in waves. "Wait. Mr. Carter," she stammered, her voice thin, as if she were forcing the words out. Alex turned to her, his welcoming expression fading into something professional, crisp. "Yes, Susan," he said, nodding once. "I see you've already met Mr. Carter." Susan's lips parted, but she couldn't find the words, her face draining of color as the truth sank in, piece by piece. I didn't realize," she whispered, taking a step back. Alex's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between her and Darrell. "You didn't realize he's the new owner of this dealership," he finished for her, his voice flat. The silence that followed was a silence you could feel in your bones. Darrell took a breath, his eyes moving to Susan, who now looked impossibly small, clutching her clipboard like it might keep her from sinking into the polished tile. "I trust this wasn't your ideal welcome," Alex added, his voice low, filled with quiet disappointment. Darrell lifted a hand, stopping him gently. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of years of these moments. "It's all right, Alex," Darrell said. "I think Susan and I just got off on the wrong foot." But everyone in that room knew it wasn't about the wrong foot. It was about the wrong assumption. And as Susan's eyes glistened under the fluorescent lights, she finally understood the one truth that could not be polished away. She had tried to push out the man who owned everything she was trying to protect. The tension in the showroom clung to the air, thicker than the scent of wax and leather. Susan stood frozen, her lips parted as if she might speak, but no words came. Her clipboard shook faintly in her hands, tapping against her blazer with a soft, uneven rhythm. Darrell watched her quietly, letting the silence do what words could not. He glanced at Alex, who gave him a respectful nod before turning to the staff, his voice cutting through the hush with a quiet authority. "Everyone," Alex announced, "please head to the conference room. Mr. Carter would like to speak with you." The words rippled through the staff like a wave. Heads turned. Papers were quickly set down. Phones were slipped into pockets. No one dared to meet Susan's eyes as they filed toward the glass-walled conference room at the back of the dealership. Susan lingered, her feet rooted, her eyes flicking to Darrell, searching for some sign of what would happen next. Darrell simply nodded toward the conference room. "Let's go," he said softly. They walked together through the showroom, the glossy cars reflecting the moment back at them, unblinking. Inside the conference room, the staff settled into their chairs, the usual easy chatter gone. The room was sleek, glass walls, a polished black table, leather chairs, but today it felt like it was holding its breath. Susan sat near the back, her clipboard now hugged to her chest, a silent apology written in the way she avoided looking at anyone. Darrell stood at the head of the table, his hands resting lightly on its edge as he took a deep breath, letting the quiet stretch for just a moment longer. "Thank you all for joining me," he began, his voice steady but carrying a gentle edge that made every head in the room lift to listen. "For those who don't know, I'm Darrell Carter. As of last month, I'm the new owner of Prestige Motors." A few staff members murmured, some blinking in surprise, others shifting uncomfortably as they remembered the scene that had just played out on the showroom floor. Darrell let the weight of the moment settle before continuing. "I came here today dressed like this," he gestured to his hoodie and jeans, "for a reason. I wanted to see how this dealership really operates when no one knows who I am. How customers are treated when there's no pressure to impress the boss." His eyes moved slowly around the room, meeting each person's gaze without anger, but without softening the truth. "What I experienced today," he said, pausing, "was disappointing. Susan lowered her head, her fingers tightening on the clipboard until her knuckles turned white. Darrell glanced at her for only a moment before looking back to the staff as a whole. "And it's not just about me," he continued, his voice quiet but firm. "It's about every single person who walks through those doors. People who deserve respect, dignity, and fairness, regardless of what they wear, what they look like, or what you think they can afford." The air in the room grew dense, the truth settling into each person's chest as Darrell's calm voice cut through years of silent assumptions. "This dealership," Darrell said, leaning forward just slightly, "is going to be known for more than just the cars we sell. It's going to be known for how we treat people." And as the staff sat quietly, some swallowing hard, others shifting under the weight of accountability, Susan finally lifted her eyes to meet Darrell's, her lips trembling as she prepared to speak. The air in the glass-walled conference room felt impossibly still as Susan finally lifted her eyes, the clipboard now resting limply in her lap. Her voice cracked, forcing her to swallow before trying again. "I made a mistake." Her eyes glistened under the fluorescent lights, and for the first time that day, the carefully curated armor of authority she wore slipped, revealing the human beneath it. "I misjudged you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm truly sorry." A hush fell over the room, the staff watching, waiting, holding their breath as they looked between their manager and the man who now owned everything around them. Darrell nodded, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he let out a slow exhale, the tension in his shoulders easing, though the weight in the room remained. "Thank you for saying that," he replied, his voice calm but direct. "But this isn't just about me, Susan. This is about every single person who's ever been dismissed, ignored, or pushed out of a place like this because of how they looked or what someone assumed about them." Susan's lips parted as if to respond, but she closed them again, the truth settling over her as visibly as the tears threatening to spill. Darrell straightened, letting his gaze move across the faces of every staff member in the room. "This dealership is going to be different," he said firmly. "We are going to build a place where excellence isn't just about the cars we sell, but about the way we make people feel when they walk through those doors." He paused, letting the promise land. No assumptions, no dismissals, no quiet discrimination hidden behind polite smiles. A younger sales associate, no older than 25, raised his hand timidly. Darrell nodded for him to speak. "Mr. Carter," the young man began, his voice wavering, "sometimes it's hard not to assume, you know? We're told to qualify leads, to look for serious buyers. It's part of the culture." Darrell nodded, acknowledging the honesty. "I get it," he replied. "But we're not here to justify bias. We're here to challenge it. You don't know who's serious based on the shoes they wear or the car they drive now. You don't know their story. So don't pretend you do." The young man lowered his hand, nodding slowly, while others in the room shifted, the discomfort of reflection visible in their posture. Darrell looked back at Susan, whose eyes hadn't left his. "I believe in second chances, Susan," he said softly. "And this is yours, if you're willing to take it." Her breath hitched, her eyes finally spilling tears she quickly wiped away, nodding as she whispered, "I won't let you down." Darrell looked around the room one last time, his steady presence shifting the energy from tension to quiet determination. "Good," he said, stepping back from the table. "Because change starts today." The hum of the air conditioner filled the quiet as Darrell took a breath, letting the weight of his last words settle before he continued. "This isn't going to be easy," he said, his eyes scanning each face around the table. "But it's necessary." He reached into his hoodie pocket, pulling out a folded sheet of paper, laying it on the table. It was a draft of the new customer care guidelines he had designed before ever stepping into the dealership. "I've been working on these since before the purchase was finalized," he explained, his tone steady but warm. "Because I knew that the biggest asset here isn't these cars." He gestured toward the glass wall, beyond which the rows of gleaming vehicles sat under bright lights. "It's people." The staff leaned in, curiosity beginning to outweigh their discomfort. "From now on," Darrell continued, "every customer will be greeted with the same level of respect, no matter what they wear, no matter what they drive, no matter what you think they can afford." He paused, locking eyes with a senior salesperson who looked uneasy. "And if you think you can tell who is worthy and who isn't based on a first glance, it's time to unlearn that. Because that mindset? It will cost you. It will cost us." Susan sat straighter, clutching the clipboard to her chest as if it were the last piece of the old world she still understood, before letting it slide down into her lap. "I will personally lead mandatory inclusivity and bias training for everyone in this room, Darrell continued, including management. His eyes flicked to Susan, who nodded with a visible swallow of pride. Because this is not about checking a box or avoiding embarrassment like what happened today, he said, letting his gaze soften as it moved across the room. It's about building a culture that sees humanity first. He glanced toward Alex, who stood by the door, arms folded, a quiet respect in his eyes. Alex will oversee this transition with me. And for those of you wondering, no, this isn't a threat to your job. It's an opportunity, but it will be a measure of your commitment. A young receptionist raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Carter, what happens if someone doesn't want to change? Darrell's eyes held hers, calm and unwavering. Then they'll find themselves working somewhere else. The receptionist nodded, a spark of relief and understanding in her eyes, while the older staff exchanged wary glances, realizing the seriousness of the shift. Darrell let out a slow breath, the gravity of the moment matching the steady determination in his voice. We will lead the industry, not just in luxury cars, but in how we treat people. That is what will set Prestige Motors apart. Outside, the Arizona sun continued to blaze down on the showroom windows, illuminating the polished cars. But inside, something more powerful was shifting quietly, uncomfortably, but undeniably. Change had arrived. The next morning, the Arizona sun rose over Prestige Motors, spilling gold across the sleek glass showroom. The cars gleamed as usual, but inside, something felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Darrell walked through the front doors, wearing the same gray hoodie and sneakers as before. This time, every head turned. Some nodded nervously. Others offered quick, polite smiles, the kind that said, "We remember who you are now." But Darrell wasn't here for fear or forced politeness. He was here to see who was ready to change. Susan stood near the reception desk, dressed in her sharp blazer, but her posture was humbler, her eyes softer, carrying the weight of a lesson learned. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she greeted, her voice steady but respectful, a far cry from the clipped suspicion of their first meeting. "Morning, Susan," Darrell replied, a small smile touching his lips. "Today, I'm just a customer again." Susan blinked but caught herself, nodding with understanding. "Of course. Welcome." Darrell strolled past her, moving through the rows of polished luxury cars, letting his fingers trail near the doors, the scent of leather and clean wax filling the air. Sales associates hovered nearby, hesitant, unsure if they should approach. Then a young associate, Marcus, the same one who had spoken up in the meeting, stepped forward, clipboard in hand, his nerves visible but his eyes steady. "Good morning, sir," Marcus said, offering a genuine, practiced smile. "Is there anything I can help you find today?" Darrell turned to him, nodding with quiet approval. "Actually, Marcus," he said, "I'm interested in learning about that black coupe over there." They walked together toward the car, Marcus explaining the specs and features without assumption or rush, treating Darrell like any other valued customer, letting the conversation be led by interest, not judgment. Nearby, Darrell noticed Susan observing, her hands clasped in front of her, watching every movement, every word, with the eyes of someone learning what leadership really looked like. Marcus opened the door to the coupe, letting Darrell sit inside, adjusting the seat, feeling the leather hug him comfortably. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked, his tone warm, without a hint of condescension. Darrell looked around the cabin, then up at Marcus, a small, satisfied smile forming. "It feels like progress," he replied. Marcus's shoulders relaxed, the tension melting into a grin. As Darrell stepped out, he looked around the showroom, seeing staff watching, understanding that this wasn't just about selling a car. It was about proving they could unlearn the culture of quiet exclusion they had carried for too long. "Marcus," Darrell said, clapping him lightly on the shoulder, "thank you for showing me what we're building here." Marcus's grin widened, pride flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." Darrell turned, catching Susan's gaze. She gave a small nod, one of gratitude, but also a promise to do better. Outside, the sun climbed higher, reflecting off the dealership windows, while inside, a single, powerful truth took root. This wasn't just a dealership anymore. It was a place where people were seen. Days turned into a week, and word spread through Prestige Motors like a breeze before a storm. Darrell's presence became part of the daily rhythm. Sometimes he walked the floor, speaking with customers as if he were just another car enthusiast. Other times, he observed quietly from the glass office upstairs, watching who had embraced the change and who still clung to the old ways. It was during one of these quiet observations that Darrell saw it. A middle-aged black couple had walked in, dressed casually in shorts and polos, smiles bright as they admired a red convertible near the front. Marcus approached them with ease, offering a warm welcome and asking how he could assist. But across the floor, another senior salesman, Ron, who had been with Prestige Motors for nearly 15 years, watched with thinly veiled annoyance. Ron leaned toward a colleague, muttering under his breath, shaking his head as if to dismiss the couple's worth. Darrell saw it in the way Ron's eyes rolled, and the subtle disgust twisting his lips. And Darrell felt that old familiar burn. But he stayed calm. Later that afternoon, Darrell called Ron into his office. The glass walls offered no place to hide, and staff outside watched with silent anticipation as Ron sat, crossing his arms, eyes wary. "Mr. Carter," Ron began stiffly, "you wanted to see me?" Darrell nodded, sliding a tablet across the table, showing the dealership's live camera footage, the exact moment Ron had rolled his eyes and turned away from the couple on the floor. "I want to talk about this," Darrell said, his voice calm, steady. Ron shifted, trying to force a chuckle. Come on. You know how it is, boss. Not everyone who walks in here is serious." Darrell's eyes locked onto his, soft but unblinking. "And you know how it is here now, Ron," he replied quietly. "We don't make assumptions. We don't dismiss people because we think we know their story." Ron's mouth tightened. "With respect, sir, I've been here a long time. I know how to qualify leads." Darrell leaned back, folding his hands calmly. And yet, Marcus didn't need to qualify them to treat them with respect. That couple? They're purchasing that red convertible tomorrow. Full price. No financing. Ron's eyes widened, the color draining from his face. "I understand this is a shift," Darrell continued, his voice never rising, "but we can't afford the cost of arrogance anymore." The silence stretched. Ron swallowed, leaning back, searching for words. "I'll try to adjust," he muttered. Darrell nodded. "I hope you do. But understand, Ron, this is your only warning. I'm not running a place where people are made to feel small so we can feel big." Ron opened his mouth to argue, but saw the quiet certainty in Darrell's eyes and stopped. He stood, nodding stiffly, before leaving the office, the glass door closing softly behind him. Darrell let out a slow breath, looking out over the showroom. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He was here to build a place that reflected the dignity he knew every person deserved. And if it meant letting some people go to protect that mission, he was ready. A week later, the sun rose over Prestige Motors on a Saturday morning, flooding the glass showroom with warmth as Darrell stood out front, hands in his pockets, watching the first families arrive. Today wasn't about sales quotas or luxury packages. Today was Community Day. A food truck parked near the service bays, filling the air with the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries. A local jazz duo played near the entrance, their soft melodies drifting among the rows of gleaming cars. Kids ran between the vehicles with balloon animals in their hands, laughter echoing off the glass walls that once reflected only silent judgment. Customers, old and new, filtered in, some dressed in suits, others in hoodies, some with children on their hips, others holding the hands of elderly parents. No one was turned away. No one was judged. And for the first time, Prestige Motors felt alive in a way that wasn't measured in profit margins but in the warmth of genuine welcome. Darrell moved through the crowd, shaking hands, sharing smiles, and answering questions about the cars without the usual pretense. He stopped to chat with a teenager who stood in awe beside a blue sports car, explaining how hard work and discipline could make even the wildest dreams feel possible. Near the service area, Susan stood beside Marcus, helping an elderly couple understand the tech features of a hybrid sedan. Her once rigid posture was replaced by a soft patience, her eyes brighter with purpose. She caught Darrell's gaze across the showroom, offering a small, genuine smile. He nodded back, silently acknowledging the progress she had made. Later, as the jazz music played and children's laughter mixed with the hum of conversation, Darrell gathered the staff for a quick moment near the reception desk. "I want you all to look around," he said, his voice calm but carrying, cutting gently through the noise. "This is what Prestige Motors is now. It's not just a place to sell cars. It's a place where people feel seen, respected, and welcomed." The staff, from reception to senior sales, stood quietly, letting the moment land, the reflection of families, neighbors, and first-time buyers shining in the polished windows behind Darrell. "This is how we win," he continued. "Not just financially, but in the way that matters most." A small ripple of agreement moved through the team, some nodding, others smiling softly, realizing that today, they were building something bigger than a paycheck. Darrell stepped back, letting them return to their work, greeting customers with warmth, explaining features with genuine care, and creating connections that would outlast a single sale. Outside, the Arizona sun shone down on the dealership, but inside, something brighter was taking root. A culture of respect, a standard of dignity, a promise that every person who walked through those doors would leave feeling seen. And Darrell knew this was the real victory. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Arizona mountains, Prestige Motors slowly emptied, the laughter and chatter giving way to a gentle, satisfied quiet. Darrell stood alone in the showroom, the scent of leather and coffee lingering in the air, the polished cars reflecting the fading light. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, no longer the man in the hoodie fighting to be seen, but a leader who had quietly, firmly changed the culture of a place that had once measured worth in shoes and assumptions. He walked past the black coupe he'd admired on his first visit, pausing to run his fingers along its glossy surface. He remembered how it felt to stand here, dismissed, measured, doubted, and how it felt to stand here now. Behind him, Susan approached quietly, her heels no longer an announcement of superiority but simply a part of her stride. She stopped, hands folded in front of her, her voice soft. "Mr. Carter," she said, "thank you for giving me the chance to do better." Darrell turned, offering her a small, warm smile. "Thank you for taking it." She nodded, emotion flickering in her eyes before she turned to leave, the glass doors closing softly behind her. Alone again, Darrell let out a slow breath, looking around the place he now owned. But more than ownership, he had claimed something deeper. The right to belong. The power to change what needed to be changed. The quiet revenge of proving them wrong not with anger, but with action. He pulled out his phone, opening a blank note, his thumbs hovering for a moment before typing. "People will remember how you made them feel before they remember what you sold them." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, stepping outside as the cool desert breeze met him, the sky a canvas of pink and gold. Across the street, a family loaded into a modest sedan, their laughter ringing out, a child waving at Darrell as they drove away. He lifted his hand in return, a small, warm reminder that this work was bigger than business. It was about dignity. It was about respect. It was about seeing people and letting them see you. As the lights of Prestige Motors glowed behind him, Darrell Carter walked toward his car, no longer just a man in a hoodie, but a man who made sure the next person who walked through those glass doors would never have to fight to prove they belonged. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.